The night she was pushed onto the tracks, the train was already screaming toward her, and somewhere in the dark, a Navy SEAL's canine lifted its head and growled, because the dog had seen what men were never supposed to get away with. Rain turned the gravel black and slick, and the rails shone like twin knives under the moon. Lena Morales didn't understand at first why the officers were driving her so far from the city, why the radio stayed off, why no one answered when she asked to call her sister. She had asked questions she wasn't supposed to ask, about missing evidence, about money moving through shell charities, about names that never showed up on reports. She was a hospital records clerk, not a detective, but numbers had patterns, and patterns had led her here. The cruiser stopped where the crossing lights were broken and the weeds were taller than a man's waist. One officer opened her door, gripped her arm too tight, and smiled without warmth. "Accident-prone area," he said. "Happens all the time." She tried to run. A boot caught her ankle. Her phone skittered across the stones and died with a small, final sound. Hands shoved her, hard, and she fell, her palms scraping open as she slid between the rails. For a breathless second, everything was still. Then the ground began to hum. The hum grew into a roar. They left her there. Tires spun. Red taillights vanished. The horn of the train split the night like a scream. Lena tried to stand and her knee buckled. Panic flooded her chest, cold and absolute. She dragged herself, nails clawing at gravel, the rails vibrating so fiercely they rattled her teeth. The headlight bloomed around the bend, a white sun. She closed her eyes. And then a shape moved at the edge of the darkness, silent, fast. A dog. Rex had learned the language of fear in deserts and jungles, in places where lies got people killed. He was older now, muzzle silvered, but his senses were sharper than ever. He and his handler, Chief Petty Officer Daniel Cross, had been hiking the service road for the quiet, for the way the world still felt honest when stripped to wind and steel. Rex froze, ears up. Daniel felt the leash tighten. They ran. The train engineer saw the dog first, a blur of motion, then the man sprinting behind him, shouting, waving a flashlight. The brakes screamed. Metal shrieked against metal. Sparks flew. The train slowed just enough. Rex reached Lena and planted himself, teeth gripping the back of her jacket, hauling with all his weight. Daniel grabbed her shoulders and heaved. They rolled into the weeds as the train thundered past, a hurricane of sound and wind that flattened the grass and stole the breath from their lungs. For a long moment, no one spoke. Rain fell. Lena sobbed, body shaking, alive in a way that hurt. Daniel wrapped his jacket around her and felt Rex press close, steady as a wall. "You're safe," he said, though his voice was tight. "You're safe now." But Rex's low growl never stopped, because the dog could still smell the men who had done this, and the story wasn't finished. As the sirens finally came and Lena looked into Daniel's eyes, she realized something worse than nearly dying. Someone in a uniform had tried to erase her, and they would come back to finish the job. The hospital lights were too bright. Lena watched them slide across the ceiling, and tried to slow her breathing. Daniel sat in the chair beside her bed, boots muddy, posture easy but eyes alert. Rex lay at his feet, head on paws, watching every shadow like it owed him money. They told her it was a miracle. They told her to rest. They told her the officers who had picked her up had reported a miscommunication. Daniel didn't like the way the words slid around the truth. Rex didn't like the smell of the men who came to ask questions. Lena told Daniel everything. About the missing files. About the charity accounts. About the officers whose names kept appearing like fingerprints on every lie. Daniel listened the way he had learned to listen in places where mistakes were fatal. He didn't interrupt. When she finished, he nodded once. "We don't outrun this," he said quietly. "We expose it." Protection came in pieces. A safe house that smelled like dust and old coffee. A phone that changed numbers. Long nights where sleep refused to come and Rex's breathing was the only thing that kept the panic at bay. Daniel taught Lena how to notice exits, how to breathe when fear tried to steal her voice. He never promised it would be easy. He promised it would be worth it. The corrupt cops came like a weather front. A break-in staged as a burglary. A car that followed too close, headlights off. A friendly face offering help that felt wrong. Each time, Rex warned them first, ears pricked, body tense, a sound deep in his chest that meant danger. Each time, Daniel moved them one step ahead. The evidence grew. Daniel called favors he hated to call, names he trusted because they had earned it the hard way. A journalist who remembered what courage looked like. An internal affairs investigator who had buried a partner and was done pretending the rot wasn't real. Files were copied. Ledgers traced. A train schedule pulled from a city server that someone had forgotten to scrub. The night it broke, rain fell again. Lena stood in a parking garage with Daniel and Rex, hard hammering, as the corrupt officers realized their game was over. One tried to run. One tried to bargain. One tried to reach for a weapon and found Rex faster, the dog a blur of muscle and discipline, stopping the threat without killing the man. Justice doesn't have to be cruel to be final. In the aftermath, there were apologies that came too late and headlines that came too fast. Lena testified with her voice shaking but unbroken. She watched the men who had tried to erase her stand and listen as their names were read aloud in a courtroom that smelled like old wood and truth. She learned that survival wasn't just staying alive. It was refusing to disappear. Months later, Lena stood at a crossing where the lights had been fixed. Trains passed safely now. Daniel stood beside her, Rex leaning into her leg, solid and warm. "You did this," Daniel said. She shook her head. "We did." Rex looked up at them, eyes bright, tail thumping once, as if to say the same. Final hook and message keeps viewers till the last second. The tracks would remember what happened here, but they wouldn't define her, because when power tried to silence the truth, it learned something it could never unlearn. Courage has witnesses, loyalty has teeth, and even in the darkest places, someone is always watching.